talk to them. They're going to have people that are going to be mic'd up come over here. And that, I think everything should be good.
Where do they need to go? Do they need to come here to get mic'd up?
Yeah.
Just come right back
just
here?
come right over here and I'll mic them up.
Nah, we're already behind.
What?
Hey, Jeremy, are you emailing that to me right now?
Check. Hey, I'm doing pretty good. Alright, so this is going to be your log, and you're going to be sitting over here on the far left. Or do you guys know where you're going to be sitting? I'm sitting on the far left. You're on the... Okay. So I put myself on the far right. Okay. So
Tell me what I need.
Alright, so for you'll be on the far left. That'll be your mic. And so...
Is that our left?
I'm saying my left. Well, I'm saying on my left.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
We'll do it 1, 2, 3, 4. Exactly. So the next man, who's going to be sitting next to him? I am. Here we go. So, and you guys can go ahead and turn them on and leave them on. I have the mics muted right now, but I'll unmute them once you guys get onto the stage.
So turn them on?
You can turn them on. Yes, you just put the lav in my belt pack here, and then have it higher to your and then place the mic. Make sure the mic is just like right around this area, facing your, going straight up towards you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you sent it. Sorry, I thought you were
Actually,
wrong.
you can put it.
Yep, got it.
Center.
Perfect.
Yeah, that should be. Not unless you're like.
Hey, Ben, can you go out into the hall and just pull anybody in who's out there? Hey, does anybody know what button I have to push to make this full screen? Boom. Great. Alrighty. Afternoon, everyone. How's everybody doing? So, welcome back for the last couple of events before this evening's happy hour. There's literally no end to this first day. It's just one awesome thing after the other. Don't worry, booze comes in at some point to make it even better. One of the things I mentioned this morning, this is sort of like the secret sauce that makes our conferences different and better and special. They're called discovery activities. Those of you who are familiar with Clayton Christensen's work, the Innovator's Dilemma, I think he's possibly the person who coined the term. Maybe somebody else did, but that's where I know it from. And these are the things that help facilitate some of the ideation and some of the sort of engaging collaborative dynamics of this entire conference. It's something that's unlike anything else you'll find if you go to, I won't disparage any think tanks. We have people in the audience that may represent them. I don't want to drop any names, but so we're gonna get started. I'm gonna do just a brief intro to set the stage, and then Jeremy is going to actually lead the specific part of the session. So if you have something in your hands or anything like that, in about 5 minutes, you're gonna have to get up, 2 minutes maybe. So just fair warning. Over here, this is a little bit of how we on the planning team think about death. When we think about building a network or changing culture in national security and creating a community of innovators, this is sort of the way that we frame it. If you're familiar with human-centered design, persona profiling is a core element of that. You have to understand who your customers and stakeholders are in order to serve them to create value. And this is like our second or third iteration of this. For the record, there are multiple persona maps that we've used. This is the one that I'm using for this exercise, just for that. Anyways, we like to sort of divide our community into 3 groups, but it's not clear cut. There's a lot of overlap, and that's why using a Venn diagram helps. The entrepreneurs are the people who are currently somewhere in the government, whether you're a civilian in OSD or Department of the Army, or you are in uniform, although not right now. You are an entrepreneur. You're fighting the bureaucracy from the inside, and you are also closest to some of the pain points and touch points of issues that we have. Outdated technology or policies that don't make sense. You're the person who's suffering through that talent management issue. On the next 2 groups, we have the entrepreneurs, the people who have founded and launched a venture to solve a problem. Hopefully it's a critical problem too, but it's something that you believe in and are trying to push through to fruition to solve that problem. You have taken that step forward and gone from 0 to 1. And then we have a whole collective group of people who are allies in innovation or allied innovators. They are the people who, I am now in that group. I am now no longer an active duty officer. So I work at an organization that is relatively innovative, and I am trying to be in a position where I can influence how cloud computing is incorporated in the DoD and the IC. And there are plenty of other people here in that space. We have sponsors that are coming from that space. We have people here who individually represent other companies that are there, because we all collectively share in the burden of reforming and fixing national security. It's a collective good, so we all have a vested interest in it. And so I'd like you all to take a minute. Like I said, you had 2 minutes to put anything down. And we're going to sort of divide into those groups. I need you to self-identify. Entrepreneurs, and allied innovators. Ready, break. 30 seconds. I do. Yep.
Oh, actually, you guys need to be sitting at tables. I guess that wasn't entirely clear. The tables are where you need to be sitting. But I love that you guys made a circle. That's awesome. But you need to be sitting at a table, according to your group. So you should be at a table where people that you're talking to, you're like, oh, yeah, we kind of run in the same crowd. Everyone's getting their exercise if you didn't already. All right, everyone should have friends. No one should be lonely at a table by themselves. Lila. I know. Okay. So these are just some examples. Again, if you're not sure where you fall, these are things that we had here. We're like, okay, these are maybe kind of where these dope out in terms of each of those 3 personas, but by no means an exhaustive list, and by no means necessarily exactly what that looks like. So the question that you guys are going to look at, we're going to use a tool that a lot of improv troupes use. So if you guys have seen, God, I can't remember the name of the movie right now, but there's a movie that came out recently that was talking about improv troops. And so it's basically yes and, right? So the question that I think you guys are interested in, and Def is definitely interested in as well, is from these three personas, right? Entrepreneurs, entrepreneurs, allied innovators. How can Def better support that persona to drive innovation, right? So as you're thinking about, and I've got the really like gross version here, the hand sketch version, right? As you're thinking about the things in black up here, so Cloud Advisory, Agoras, DefX, the website, the annual conference, the newsletter, the innovation competition, right? Stuff that Def has, kind of provided as a service. Why you're here, why you're part of Def, right? How can Def come up with either ways to improve that, things to continue? We're looking for that kind of feedback, and also for new ideas. So the fun thing about Yes and is you just keep going, right? So everyone should have a piece of butcher block paper in the middle. And if you guys, okay, you guys are good. And a bunch of sticky notes. So you're going to basically, someone's going to start, whoever that brave person is, and you're going to pick something, one of those services, some other idea, right? And you're going to say, okay, this is something we can do. You've got one sentence, could be a phrase, whatever, but it's not a monologue. You're going to say it out loud, write it on a sticky note, put it in, I guess, the top left of that piece of butcher block paper, right? Then you go to the person on your right. Your person on the right is going to build on that, right? So you don't get to say, well, that's stupid. I don't care about the website. You get to say, yes, and something else, right? So you continue to build upon each other. So you could cross any number of those different things. You could come up with something totally different. It could be a total bust. I guess you'll have to tell me afterwards if this sucked. But chances are you're going to come across something based off of what some of these other people are that you're sitting around. And we're really interested in that. So we're going to take like 10 minutes, get through as many rounds as you either have sticky notes for or room on your piece of butcher block paper. And then at the end, we're interested in being able to continue to engage on this. So take a sticky, put it on the back with your name, email, contact information, whatever, just as a, hey, we want to reach out and say, hey, this is what this turned into, or hey, I want to know more about this. We're going to put these up. Everyone can kind of take a look at them, see what those are, and that will continue to help kind of spur some conversation throughout the weekend. So are there any questions that I can address? Does this make sense? Yes, and you continue to build on each other. Everyone gets one sentence, one sticky note per round. So you keep going. It's not like 8 sticky notes total. You just keep going, 10 minutes, and go. take about 2 more minutes. All right, everybody finish your last sticky. Finish your last sticky and then put your contact info stuff on the back. Name, phone number, email address, whatever. Yep, whatever. Yep, whatever would be a useful way for whether you guys want to get in touch with each other because you thought this was awesome, or you thought like one person was cool, or you are interested in talking about this more, and you would love to be contacted by Def about it. This is just a way for us to not just have this stuff randomly out here and have a better chance of there is something really cool and you guys are really excited about it. Doesn't just randomly end up on paper, nowhere else. So it will randomly end up on paper. And I'm curious, show of hands, how many folks thought this was a little bit hard? Like a little bit like, oh, I have to build on that? Where do I even go with that, right? Like, hopefully everybody, if it was super easy, then I'm very excited to hear how you've solved all of the problems related to your particular issue. But yeah, hopefully it was like a little bit weird and a little bit hard. And hopefully that made you think, and hopefully you guys were able to build off of, you know, whatever it was, not just, okay, forced to go from one thing to another, but what, you know, someone else, you know, said, the way that someone else thought something else was interesting for you. This is also a way just to, hey, now there's forced interaction with other people. Maybe someone who you didn't know, maybe someone with a different background or a different idea than maybe you thought that they had. We're going to post all this stuff up there. You'll be able to look at what other people are doing, thinking about it. We're definitely still interested in figuring out how to answer that question, right? Because that's kind of why Def is here. And so as you do continue to have other ideas, think about stuff, please share those. I'm sure Justin would love if you like tweeted that out. Yeah, if you have feedback or other things, I heard yes ands, I heard how might we's, I heard a lot of good stuff going on out there, and appreciate that. So now that you've moved and gotten comfortable in your chair, you can go back to your other chair because we're going to start the panel off. Thanks, guys.
Did you all get mic'd up? Oh, you have. Okay, perfect. Yeah, no, come on up.
mic'd now, just for everybody to know.
All right, everyone. So this is our last event for today here. Before we head over to the innovation competition and happy hour, I stress, and happy hour at Galvanize. And well, there's nothing that says, Ben, Justin, you wanna? There's just like last night, although infinitely better. There's plenty of alcohol. There's also plenty of great food. This is Texas, so there's all sorts of wonderful meat products, wings. I'm sure there's brisket. I don't know. But the happy hour is over at Galvanize, which is just a gorgeous space. How far is it? It's like 6 blocks, or is it driving distance? Chris, anyways, we've got a panel coming up. This is called Stories from the Field. This is an element of being able to see people in action, and we don't know that they're success stories. We don't know that they're failures, but they are suffering through the challenges of working through innovation right now, and it's a hard conversation to understand what their experiences are, but these are lessons that we collectively as a community can truly gain from. Each one of them has an excellent project there that they could talk for an entire hour about, but I'm going to cut myself off here and let Ivana introduce them, and we're going to dive into their stories. So, Ivana.
Hey guys, so we're going to try to make this really interesting because I know that half of you were saying during the break.
Mic's not on.
The mic, it is on. What? No, it's on.
Oh.
Test. Mine's on.
Hello? Test. I'm on.
Yep.
I am not turned on.
I'm on.
Number 4.
Number 4.
Hello, hello.
Bye.
Kristen, how far is Galvin? Got the time you got. It's about 25-minute walk. 25-minute walk, or very short a mile, or a very short run. Okay.
Turn it off and back on.
It's mostly downhill. Go straight to the river.
Eric, what number are you?
2, I think.
No, I'm saying like, what channel are you?
Group 5, channel 20.
We can always just start and we can
We just
project.
start.
Go ahead, get started.
All right, so as I was saying, I want to make this really interactive and interesting, and so there will be a lot of personal stories. That works. That you'll hear from, mainly because half of you during the break were saying how much you really needed alcohol. And so we can't be substitutes for alcohol, but we'll try to get somewhat close. We're going to get started, and why don't you each take about 1 to 2 minutes to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Eric Burleson. I served in the Army for 8 years, after which I came here to Austin to go to business school. While in business school, I started a company called Prepify, raised some money, spent all that money denying that the market needed the product, ultimately left the company while they iterated on a new product. My latest project is something called Separating from Service. It is a peer-led group curriculum for transitioning service members to help accelerate their transition into the civilian world. In Austin, they say there are very successful entrepreneurs and experienced entrepreneurs. I'm the latter.
So I am Kaylee McKenna. I am an Air Force active duty member at this time. I am a pilot by trade, C-130 background, and then MQ-9s, which you've heard of as the drones that are shooting people everywhere. So that's me. I have an MBA, I have a master's in strategic studies, And what is most relevant to you guys in this audience is I just did my fellowship with the Defense Innovation Board in the Pentagon. So Josh Marcuse was my boss, and we really worked very closely with the Silicon Valley members to try and bring innovation into the Department of Defense. And we have 2 more of the team over there at that table right there. So there is a very large effort on the Pentagon staff and supported by the SecDef's front office to really bring innovation within the department. So.
Hi, everybody. Can you guys hear me? My name is Brendan Mullen. I served in the U.S. Army as a combat engineer. Went to West Point. I got out of the service, didn't know what I wanted to do, and landed kind of with a little bit of serendipity with one of my college classmates who had just started a defense consultancy in the D.C. area. Right time, right place, luck and success, where we had a lot of growth. I left the business after about 3 years of not sleeping, and before we knew it, we had 110 employees around the country working on a variety of different government contracts and government kind of projects. Started the current company, MKS2 Technologies. This November will be 9 years. It's alive. It's still thriving and growing. I'm proud to say 2 weeks ago we were named number 92 by Inc. magazine, fastest private growing companies in America. I do also find that kind of laughable, where every day I almost look at the clock, and if it's 5 o'clock and the bus hasn't been crashed, I kind of celebrate. Thus the premature gray hair and the wrinkles. But I'm proud to be here. In between all that, I did squeeze out my MBA at Notre Dame, and I'm trying to continue to use the work we have and the cash flow to scale and innovate. So I appreciate you guys having me here.
Awesome, great. So let's start with the easy questions first. The first is, I think all 3 of you talked about this theme of transition, right? So whether you're transitioning from military to civilian, or you're transitioning from being operational on the ground to policy and being, stuck in an office. Can you talk a little bit about your experiences in that transition phase, and basically any tips that you can give out?
I transitioned out of the military in 2013. I had just gotten married, so I got married, separated from the Army, moved across the country, started business school, and we found out my wife was pregnant. Pro tip, don't do that. All of that at once was a really massive change to work through all at the same time. And I found myself trying to apply much of what I'd learned in the military to my life as a civilian. And to say that there wasn't exactly a, let's call it a product market fit, is an understatement. It was a very challenging time, and it took a lot of soul searching and personal work to appreciate the nuance of my life as it was now, or as it is now. So I think that probably the most important thing that I did was go to school. My MBA was a forum where I could make a lot of mistakes, more or less privately. I mean, they were publicly to my classmates, but they weren't like career ending. So finding that sort of safe environment so that you can make those mistakes and you can iterate on them was really crucial for me.
So I guess to answer your question for me about transition phases, I just went through a very large one. I would consider myself a big picture strategist, and I really thrived at the Pentagon where we're doing kind of big picture policy. And I just had to leave that and go back to an operational squadron where I'm learning how to fly and have to go do tactical things again. And so with that is, many in this audience are military members, and you go from assignment to assignment. And I would say be very intentional in understanding what your strengths are. So as a big picture strategist, when I'm working on a passion project, all of us have, as intrapreneurs, have these passion projects that we work on. It can be very difficult when we're moving from job to job. Oftentimes that passion project will fall by the wayside with someone not doing that job. So be very intentional about what you can bring with you and then what you need to train someone else to do to make sure that there's not that stopgap And in that, I have found that I have to be very intentional about what I'm very good at and what I'm not very good at to make sure that I have someone that's matching me when I'm working on a project like that. So I would say in transitioning, making sure that you have someone to follow you in the work that you find the most important, that you don't want to drop when you move in PCS and assignments.
Awesome. If I could, how many are transitioning out of the service right now? We got 1, 2, 3, 4, and then in the next 5. In the next couple years, how many will be transitioning? You know, between 3 to 5 years. Okay. One piece of advice that I was given, and admittedly I did not perhaps follow as much as I should have, was however long you've been in the service, whether you went to ROTC, whether you enlisted, whether you went to a service academy, you've worn the uniform for perhaps 10, 20, however many years, right? For the first time in your life, as an adult, be selfish was what someone gave me, advice to be selfish. You've stitched the American flag to your shoulder for however many years, and for so much time, the goal and mission has been so much higher than whom you are, right? It's usually friends, family, children, service, right? And the recommendation was to be selfish for a change. Be deliberate. Take time to figure out what the heck you really want to do. I took off the uniform in 2006. It's 2017. And I can admittedly say here, I'm really proud of what I've created. However, it's not what I dreamt of, right? It's not what I wanted to do. I fell into it. And I'm having fun. I'm enjoying employing people. I'm enjoying the stuff we're doing and the projects we're doing. However, I wasn't deliberate in where I wanted to go, and I did not have a defined azimuth that I wanted to shoot and chase. And I think that lends to it me not being selfish with that time given to me during a transitional period. Like Eric, he said that he immediately went from the service into an MBA, kind of a safe environment. I didn't. I went immediately back into the workforce, took off the uniform, put on a sports coat and a button down. And so I made a ton of mistakes. That said, I carried those black eyes with pride. I said the wrong things. I pushed too hard. I wasn't diplomatic. And I had a lot of friends in council basically trying to get me off the ledge of being too aggressive. That's something as service members, we are in a full contact sport industry, right? Once you come across the other side into a industry side or commercial or private, it's not as full contact sport, if that makes sense. So I carried a lot of those black eyes with pride, but I just would recommend being selfish, understanding where you want to go when you decide to get out. And then meanwhile, if you don't know, don't get all stressed out about it, because you've got a body of work for years that will have paved a really, really fantastic road for you.
Awesome, thank you so much. My second question is really around defense innovations, which is something that all of you are involved in from different angles. There are obviously a lot of innovations. When we talk about innovations, we had, guy from GE who was here who's talking much more about the hardware aspect, and then there's also the software aspect. And I think we can basically try to categorize defense technology innovation to really two buckets. One is much more what I consider with less casualty. So these are sort of like software so that the procurement process can be better, so that the personnel system can be better. But then there are the other innovations that we really need, and those are the ones that are going to save lives out in the battlefields. And in those situations, how can you actually make sure that you get the innovations out there as fast as possible? Because you want to do that, but at the same time, if it fails at a very crucial moment, a soldier could be killed. So how do you actually balance that change?
I can start. So I would say in the Defense Innovation Board, we have a saying that DoD doesn't have an innovation problem, we have an innovation adoption problem. And so regardless of if it's a life-saving critical technology software or or not, the problem I see is the root of it, if you peel back all the layers, is the culture within the Department of Defense. And so I see that as the biggest problem for us to adopt anything. Now, when we have life-saving, critical kind of technologies, there is a little bit more leeway with the culture to get to that quick fix. Because like we've seen in some of the breakout sessions today, the DoD does have ways to acquire things quickly. We just don't use it. And so it has to do with the cultural level of risk that we're willing to take. And so I see that as the biggest underlying problem to that question.
I would say the one who procures to the federal government, and we work for the U.S. Army, Department of Veteran Affairs, as well as USAID. My challenge is having the risk tolerance as a small business owner to make large-scale capital investments for the bid and proposal process, which in many regards is wildly laborious. Someone mentioned here, and I don't know if it was in a public forum or it was one of the breakouts, was, hey, if you like someone, you got a good product. In a private enterprise, you say, hey, let's do another meeting. And then the follow-on meeting starts talking about the scope of work. The next meeting starts talking about costing. And perhaps meeting 5, you're handshaking. In the world that I'm in, if I see a project that we're interested in and we have the core competencies to chase it, using 1 January as a date, it perhaps doesn't come out. You know, it maybe is a pre-RFP, and it doesn't come out until 28 February. I'm sorry, it's due 1 January. It comes out 1 January, it's due on 1 March, but then it gets extended 30 days. And therefore, now it's due on the 28th of April. You submit it, and it doesn't get awarded until September 1. And then you start executing work on 1 October. But meanwhile, you also have to start putting other irons in the fire. And each of those bid and proposals turn out to be perhaps $50, $70, $100, $125,000 of capital investment. So from my perspective, kind of balancing that change within that cultural issue would be, how can I speed up the procurement process from my side rather than holding my money back, waiting for that perfect opportunity, which perhaps may never come, and thus the company continues to, or could perhaps continue to either stagnate or decrease.
So one thing that I've found that veterans bring to the workforce that I don't think is as widely valued as it should be is risk mitigation. Being able to deploy a solution in a small sort of standard by the book kind of problem set. In the Army would call that a confidence target. It's a target that should go relatively easy, and you use it to work with your partner forces and sort of work out all the kinks. And you can do the same thing with a problem set, at least in the civilian sector. Being able to mitigate risk by limiting the exposure of the consequences is a really powerful tool for entrepreneurs. Now, given the procurement process and the length of time there, it's very difficult to do that. I mean, in many ways, it becomes a numbers game, and a really laborious processes can be very capital intensive. But that said, if you can find smaller environments to demonstrate value and add that into the procurement process, you might be able to mitigate risk for any given proposal.
Right on. Yep.
So I think there were 2 different answers during that question, but I guess the point that I wanted to get at essentially is the fact that even if the procurement process is not an issue, which it definitely is an issue, I'm sure we can do like another 4 days on how to fix the procurement process here. But let's just say that it's not an issue. There's still the issue of adoption, which I think was Kaylee's point, because if you're soft on the ground and you know that method A has worked and has always worked for the past 10 years, why would you try, method B if you don't know if it doesn't have a track record, especially when there's someone's life at stake, right? And so I guess it's also about like, from a policy perspective, how do you balance that? And at the same time, for the entrepreneurs, how can you actually take that hesitancy into consideration when you're building your financial model, your cash flow, and making sure that you're actually creating a product that is, X% guaranteed or something like that?
I would just respond to that and say, I think that within the Department of Defense, there's a variety of different cultures, and some cultures are more accept risk a lot better than others. So that is why you see the SOF world leading a lot of these changes, the Navy SEALs. And also, when you look outside of the Department of Defense, the Department of Defense isn't the only three-letter agency that's purchasing things. So there are other organizations that have more levels of risk that can acquire things, test things at a different level, and do it faster and quicker than the department can. And then the department can buy it from them. So I would say find organizations that are more risk tolerant and use them as the adoptive things. And those will be the ones that are also trying to reach out to you and connect across lines as well.
Good. That's awesome.
There's another element, and I can't tell you exactly how to execute this, but there are some people. So first of all, your solution should address a problem. The worst thing that you can have is a solution looking for a problem. That's a very expensive mistake to make. That said, the groups, especially the smallest groups that suffer from that problem the most, for whom the consequences of not adopting any change are much greater than the consequences of trying something new, will be the best test group. Because they're going to be hurting the most from whatever that problem is.
And I would add on to that, absolutely. And one of the things that we've seen really high success levels is when new companies and organizations work hand in hand with the end user, and so that they can get that immediate feedback right away. Is this useful to you? Why not? One of the good examples that the Defense Innovation Board has with DIUX is the whiteboard example. So we took the Defense Innovation Board C-suite executives from Silicon Valley to the CAOC, which is an IUD, and they were able to ask General Hrigian, the 3-star general there, what is your biggest problem? And he said, my biggest problem is this whiteboard. And they're like, what do you mean? Why are you using a whiteboard? And they said, well, we've been doing this 5-year, multi-million-dollar acquisition process to try and get a software program to calculate the tanker refueling problem. We have every single day, we have hundreds of tankers out there refueling, and we're trying to maximize their reach and their gas and all of those things, but the software that they're producing doesn't do any of it. And so we're literally moving pucks, like this is this aircraft, this is this aircraft, they're gonna refuel this fighter and this fighter, they're moving this around. And he says this is the biggest suck because every single time, like we've been working on this for 4 hours and then something changes and then we have to wipe everything off the whiteboard and do it again. And so Defense Innovation Board said, well, DIUX can fix that for you. DIUX sent like 4 software engineers and they spent 2 months and $2 million and we're constantly working with the tanker guys there to produce an end product. And at the end of the day, Senator McCain and everyone canceled the multi-million-dollar contract, 5-year contract, because we had one for $2 million in 2 months. So that's a great example of the people working hand in hand with the users and saying, no, this doesn't work, but this does, this is great, but I need it to do this. It would be great if we could do that. So working with the end user, and I would say the end user is very eager to work with everybody. So.
Adding to that, it is common for entrepreneurs to try and perfect their product before they bring it to market, and really that cycle of iterate on the product and get to market should be much, much shorter. I mean, really the first version of a product should be almost embarrassingly bad. If it addresses the solution in a unique way and you can get some feedback and iterate on it, that will get you to a functional product much more quickly than trying to work on it very slowly over time in the background.
How do you get the higher ups to actually listen to you, right? Because especially when we're talking about innovation and technology, what we found personally is that anyone who's above basically a colonel, where the significant majority of those who are ranked above a colonel, they're very resistant. A lot of them, don't really know how to use modern technology. So how can you actually tell them like, hey, this is a problem, and explain it in a ways that they can actually understand?
I found the best way to get to them is to find internal champions that they trust, that are a little bit lower, a little bit more accessible. Oftentimes they appear as gatekeepers, but if you can work closely with gatekeepers and help identify the problem that they're trying to solve on behalf of their senior, then they can be a really powerful asset. We tend to think of gatekeepers as pains in the ass, frankly, but they can be a really tremendous tool. You can turn a gatekeeper into a champion if you're willing to listen to them.
I would say absolutely, and I would add that one of the ways I found is I think too often we think of as stakeholders, we do a list of the stakeholders, right? And we come up with a strategy, and then we say, well, this is the head guy, I need a guy, this 4 stars buy-in, right? And so we would go to his staff to get that 4 stars buy-in. But I've actually found a much better way to do that is to find someone who's an influencer on the outside, rather than directly attaching it to the 4-star that can make the yes or no decision. Because I would rather I don't want to ask for permission to do something. I'd rather do it with this other guy over here who is an influencer, maybe a 2-star, 3-star level, and get some forward momentum so that I can then, once I have that forward momentum and I've gone this far, I can then tell the 4-star, hey, this is what we've already done. It's already working here. We've tested it. It has the support of these 3 2-stars, 2 4-star, and then it's a much easier yes decision for him rather than going to him the first time. So that's what I choose to do. I don't know if that's the right answer, but.
I'm going to take kind of a different take on this. As a small business owner, how to get higher ups within the federal system to listen to you. I mean, I sadly kind of am a negative Nelly on this one, and it won't necessarily happen. And so you have to some degree, align and partner with some of these large integrators. Whether it's the Booz Allens or Dells or Ernst & Young, or for example, my biggest client is Accenture. We partner and work together, and they are the face, they are the brand equity, they are the ones that are moving the ball down the field, and I'm in a position of support and basically a support position, helping projects move along with Accenture. I sadly don't think a company such as mine, at such a small stage and small growth company, mid-growth if you want, ever would have influence until cultural changes change. That 70 years of what the Colonel was referencing a couple hours ago, I don't think that would ever, from my perspective, move the needle until you have a stakeholder from an outside agency or outside brand equity company helping you move the ball.
So I know that we only have, 15 more minutes? 10 more minutes? 10. So let's take some questions from you guys.
A lot of times we talk about the commercial off the shelves or meeting the requirement of something that's very easy to get, and that's the way we're accelerating. That seems to be kind of a recurring theme. But what do you think about the doctrine and requirements process? And are we even asking the right question in terms of we build tactics and strategy around a certain set of equipment, for example. But if you don't know what you want, or the thing you want does not exist yet, how do you know to ask the right question for it?
Can you be more specific, like give an example about it?
See, for example, if you do it, for example, if you doing your transport, say by a helicopter, for example, all of a sudden, or you're relying on, let's just see, UAS. So you use a UAS that is long range based off the runway, requires large support staff, et cetera. But now there's a capability to do that, vertical lift UAS, something like that. But the requirement system is built around another system that's the existing paradigm. How do you adjust the requirements in the doctrine? How do you get that in the conversation? If we look at the question frames the answer. How do you get the answer eliminated? So the process begins where it should, not necessarily trying to at the tail end of the problem.
Thank you.
In terms of forming a question better in the first place.
I'll let you tackle that. You want to tackle that?
So I would say that it's kind of two separate problems, right? The doctrine is different than the procurement process. So I would like to treat them separately. But the procurement process, I would say right now, is completely broken. I would absolutely agree with you. I don't think that there is a good way. For the MQ-9, for example, we are acquiring the MQ-X, which is something that looks exactly like the MQ-9. It doesn't do auto takeoff and land. It still has a pilot and sensor operator. And we're going to be acquiring this in 30 plus years. And that's the requirements that we're building for the next MQ-9. So this is just completely ridiculous, right? What I would say when we're talking about off-the-shelf technology is, I think that the Department of Defense doesn't do a great job in understanding future. It doesn't do well building the future. It doesn't know what the future is going to look like in 30 years. When you meet with Silicon Valley experts, they would say, I don't know what 2 years looks like from now, right? So it's constantly a cycle of small prototyping of what's going to work, right? And we don't do a good job of that. So rather than investing our money in something that is 30 years from now, we should spend all of our money doing off-the-shelf kind of advancements. One of the biggest shifts we've seen in our procurement process has not followed that is back in the day, in the Cold War timeframe, all of the R&D was in the Department of Defense. So we were the ones driving the innovation of the country. And that's not the case anymore. Now Silicon Valley, now the civilian sector is driving the innovation for the country, for the world. And we have not shifted our methods of tapping into that resource. I wish I had a solution to offer you. I don't. But I think that people like DIUX and things like that who are making a try at it are at least trying something. But right now, it's just broken. That's my opinion.
So my program is for transitioning service members, right? I first started with TAP. Who designs TAP? How does TAP create it, right? Because if I could get to service members as they're separating, they're all aggregated there, right? Sounds perfect. Until you start digging into who sets TAP, who sets that doctrine, how do you access them, what are all the different things that need to be a part of. Most of my material is focused on mental health and mental resilience. And at least when I was separating, there was almost nothing in TAP with that requirement. There are lots and lots of resources downstream from transition to address veterans in crisis, but very little to address veterans long before they get into crisis. And most veterans don't even get enrolled in the VA system after they separate. It's actually a relatively small percentage of transitioning service members. And so trying to create something that could address a population that first doesn't know or doesn't think that they need any of the support until much further down the line. And second, basically disappear immediately after the one place that you can't really get to them has been challenging, in a word. I've had to use proxies for veteran aggregation. So I go to universities, I go to online fora, I write on blogs that are common to military and veterans, and that has been one good way to get my material and my ideas in front of veterans to get access. And after a while, you start to see patterns in how people respond to it. And you can see sort of the same objections, the same reactions, the same, oh, what about this? And from that, you can iterate. There's basically two ways that you can you can get that information, and that's to get a whole lot of traffic and a whole lot of exposure to it in a very short amount of time, which is largely very expensive and very risky, or find ways to iterate over a much longer time frame. And I've done the latter. I mean, you move as quickly as you can with what you've got, but ultimately you still have to be exposed to the market like that. One really big challenge I've had is understanding when an experiment has run long enough, because separating the signal from the noise can be really hard. Like maybe you get to the right people, but they don't hear what you're talking about yet because they haven't completely separated, but you know that 6 months later they might, and so you try and re-engage them in different ways, but softly so that they don't just unsubscribe, right? So, I mean, it's a balancing act, 100%, but ultimately you have to do the thing yourself. Very few organizations or people in organizations are going to take all the risk for you. And so you've got to be agile and take on a lot of that risk yourself.
I think you asked a fantastic question. If you mind if I boil it back down, is how can we take personal responsibility for change, right? And I would say that I was shocked in my last job. I would talk to many people, and this would be like a GS-15 who was a 25-year, retired as a 25-year 06. It would be someone who has been an acquisition person for 20 years. Every single person I talked to considered themselves an innovator. Everybody. They never saw themselves as the problem. And I didn't see that as a bad thing. That gave me real hope that if these people were empowered, that they could actually shift on a dime. Like the culture within the department could shift on a dime, and it could really embrace change at a great level. But I mean, we've heard many times before that that's going to take top-down kind of support, and none of us can affect that kind of change at this level. But what we can do, and I would challenge you, is to become influential among your peers and the people that work below you. Because it's amazing how much, as you know, I'm a major, and I'm going to go be a DO of a squadron, and I will be in charge of about 150 people. And I personally I can allow them to take risks and to make change, and I can encourage the change at my level. And so I would challenge everyone to do that, to also to mentor people, to share the resources that you have. Not many people know about DEF. You guys do, but share it with your peers. And also invite people to help solve your hard problems. Because everybody, like especially engineers, really love to solve hard problems. So if you invite them into becoming part of the solution, I think we would see great change at a lower kind of grassroots level, which I think DEF is all about.
That's awesome. I would echo Haley a little bit too. Taking that own personal responsibility with your subordinates and being able to give them the microphone and the voice without any concerns or adverse actions if an individual perhaps is not as diplomatic as he or she could or should be. Also the initiative, like I didn't know much of DEF until very recently, and the fact that we're all here, some have flown from several time zones away, that also expresses such an initiative for those here to want to be part of pushing up against that uncomfortable zone that you might not be able to easily sit inside as a service member. So I kind of salute all y'all for doing that and being those that are trying to push and sit inside of that uncomfortable zone. And if you can express that down to your subordinates, that would be a fantastic ripple effect. I think perhaps you just have to deal with some diplomacy.
Awesome. I think with that, we're going to end the session and walk over to Galvanize and have drinks. Yes. Okay. Thank you very much.
As everybody's making their way out, if I could just get one thing. If you have got an idea for tomorrow afternoon's ideation session, jot it